Welcome back to the Redeem podcast. I have been excited to do this interview today with Kathy Izard. Kathy is an award-winning author, and you will get to meet her soon. But I'm doing something a little different today. Kathy was very gracious and sent me several of her books, two of which are children's books, and I've decided to share those with my listeners. If you leave a review about this episode and you mention Kathy in the review, I will put your name in a drawing and I will pull out those names, and then I will send you a message and send you one of her books. So don't forget to leave a review on Spotify or Apple. Let me know by putting the word Kathy in the review, and I will put your name in a drawing to receive one of these books. Have you ever found yourself struggling in the midst of life thinking, this is not what I had planned or hoped for? Well, then you are not alone, my friend. Life has its ups and downs, no matter how well we thought we planned things out. Welcome to the Redeemed podcast, where we will encourage others through personal experience, even when life does not go the way we planned it. Through various interviews, you will hear amazing stories of lives being transformed, even in impossible situations. My name is Lauren Burns, and I am the host of the Redeem podcast. Well, I'm excited to have our guest on the show. Kathy Izard is an award-winning author. She has written 4 books, one of which is a children's book. She has been featured on the Today Show and with Katie Couric. She's also raised over $75 million to help with homelessness and mental illness in the Charlotte area. I got a chance to read this book, The Whisper, and I couldn't put it down. From the moment, the first few pages, I just thought this book is for me, and I wanted to read the next chapter and the next chapter, and I wanted to know what was going to happen and how all the little dots connected and how the people connected. It's so encouraging, so inspiring. Kathy, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your background, how you started writing, and tell us about this fantastic book.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and I'm glad that you found yourself reading it on a book, Trust the Whisper. I've written 3 adult books, and this is my 3rd book for adults. And then, as you said, a children's book, and then there's a children's book that goes with Trust the Whisper as well, called Grace Heard a Whisper. But all of this started not by my own design. It started by this, what we call a whisper, that little voice that's telling you to do something that feels kind of inconvenient and unexpected and uncomfortable. And in my case, that was in 2007. I was a graphic designer. I was a mom of 4 daughters. I really felt like there was something different I was supposed to be doing with my life, but I couldn't figure out what that might be. I just knew that I was raised to do good, as I would call it. Maybe some of you have been raised with a servant's heart or servant's leadership, and I definitely felt kind of that piece of my life. And I didn't feel like designing logos and brochures was really answering that call or that belief that I was doing good. And so I ended up having an experience that with someone who'd been homeless over 30 years. And some of your listeners might know him. His name is Denver Moore. He was the co author of a book called Same Kind of Different as Me that was very popular. It became a movie. But I ended up having an in person meeting with Denver in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he, in a series of 4 questions, made me see homelessness in a way that I could never unsee it. And I ended up following this little whisper that he started in my life to do something about it, which was completely a little bit crazy, to tell you the truth, because as a graphic designer and a mom, what could I do about homelessness? But I ended up quitting my job, closing my design business, and going to work for what was then the soup kitchen, starting a housing program that was just 13 people, but we ended up raising $10 million and building an apartment building called Moore Place, named in part for Denver Moore, the man who inspired it. It has gone on to help and house hundreds of people. And that just led to this whole new path in my life that I was not expecting. I now write and speak and encourage others to listen to their whispers, no matter how crazy they may seem. I can give testimony that I certainly was not expecting any of this in my life, but I am forever grateful for that meeting with Denver that really changed the path of my life forever.
One thing that you talk about, I can't remember which chapter, but it's that fear voice versus the to-do voice.
Yeah, so I think in the beginning of Trust the Whisper, I talk about this idea because I want people who are reading the book to understand that I wasn't certain, right? When we hear these whispers, when we hear something that comes along that is not at all what we expect, I think the first thing we have is we maybe like me, I'm a very type A person. I've been following this to-do voice my whole life. You should go to college, you should raise a family, you should have good kids and really try to build a good life. So I was very checking off my to-dos, but as I said, I had this restlessness that I should be doing something else. And every time I would think or plan that something that would change, my fear voice would jump in about, well, who do you think you are? Well, you're not qualified to do that. How do you
Mhm.
think you could do that? And I think, especially as the mom of four daughters, I really wanted to make a hard turn in my life, maybe be a social worker or do something different that would be doing good. But I thought, well, how can I do that? I'm going to have to go back to school. I'm not qualified to do anything except for this graphic design career. And so I do think that my fear voice held me back for the longest time. I just kept checking boxes on things that seemed like it was a good life. But I didn't really have a passion for some of the things that I was doing. But the fear voice kept me from doing something much sooner. I think the thing about whispers and what changed with Denver in that moment was that it was so insistent. I could not stop hearing Denver talk to me about homelessness, and I'd been a volunteer in a soup kitchen, and was soup really saving anybody? Was it really helping anybody? What people experiencing homelessness needed were homes. And
Mhm.
so that became so insistent. It finally drowned out both my to-do voice and my fear voice. And it seemed crazier not to try, that I would at least take one step towards trying to do something better and what would happen. And just by taking that first step and the next step, it did lead to this whole different life. And I was finally able to just tell the fear voice to sit down because I was gonna try this anyway.
In the reading, you were proud to show Denver the soup kitchen and all the things that were going on there. "Look at this and look at this," and he's like, "Uh-huh, yes." And then he's like, "Is that it?" And you're like, "What? Well, yeah, what do you mean, is that it?" And he's like, "Well, where are these people going to sleep after you feed them?"
Yeah, it
Oh,
really was a light bulb moment, right? I've been volunteering, and I'm sure there's people listening who do a lot of good, and it's not that soup kitchens are bad or
no.
that any kind
Mm-mm.
of help with homeless surgeon, service agencies are bad, but it really had never occurred to me that we could do anything more than just be kind to people who were
Mhm.
experiencing homelessness. We couldn't actually solve it, could we? Because homelessness is an unsolvable problem, isn't it? And I
Mhm.
think in that conversation with Denver, I realized that that was a false assumption. We can do more. And really, it's in the trying. Could we house everyone? Maybe not. But could we house a few people? Could we change homelessness for some? And how many could that be? And at the time, I started a pilot program called Homeless to Homes, that it was just 13 people, that we found the funding to help 13 people. Um, and we very quickly realized that was like finding the cure for cancer and only allowing 13 people to live. And so
Mm.
we did create this much bigger version. More Place was built and opened in 2012. And since then, that organization, which is now called Roof Above and is in Charlotte, North Carolina, has gone on to house hundreds more. We have several different housing programs. We've converted a hotel. We have an apartment building and all kinds of scattered site apartments. There's a lot of different solutions that we've put in place, and literally thousands of people have been housed since that time. And I don't want that to sound like it's all me. It's part of a
No.
collective whisper. There was a lot of
Mhm.
people coming together in 2007 and 8, and since then in the last decade, so that a lot of solutions have been put in place. And we really have changed the way Charlotte treats and houses people who are experiencing homelessness.
Mm. You talk about the whisper, you also talk about the God dots. For the person listening, because I say these kinds of things all the time, a lot of the time I say it's like God was nudging me. God put that thought in my mind. What does that feel like? Like you mentioned, it wouldn't go away. It kept sort of being persistent.
Yes, and so I talk a lot about that in this book, Trust the Whisper, because it's 20 stories of people who listen to that nudge, that little quiet voice, and what happened. Because I realized it wasn't just me, right? I'm not the only person who's ever had this, kind of nudge and acted on it. And that's why I wanted to write this book. I wanted to tell these stories of other people and what happened so that maybe people would begin to recognize it in their own life. I had someone describe it as a thought that was not their thought, right? There's a chapter where I talk about a woman who had this thought that she should help with teens, runaway teens in Birmingham, Alabama. Well, that was not really a thought that was her thought, right? It had nothing to do with her day job, and she thought, "Why am I making this my problem?" But at the same time, she couldn't stop thinking about it, and she really started to envision the solution, which did become what's called the Way Station in Birmingham, Alabama. And so I think sometimes we have these thoughts and we dismiss them as silly ideas, or even more importantly, the God dots, the connections. We have coincidences in our life, or we call them a coincidence. We bump into someone, and something remarkable happens, or we had a silly thought and we acted on it, and it turned out fairly remarkable, but we still don't ascribe it to anything more than just coincidence. But I think that is the point of the book, is to show how chapter after chapter, time after time, when people did listen to these nudges, when they didn't just dismiss them as coincidence or chance, when they came together with other people, they do become these God dots in our life. They do point us from our own life plans onto our life path. And I think if we'd be willing to not only listen, but do something about it and share with others, we will start to see that it is more than coincidence, that there is this kind of incredible divine weave in the world if we're
Hmm.
willing to admit when we've kind of bumped into holy. And I think there are miracles around us all the time, and we bump into holy probably more often than not. When you're looking for it, I really do think the evidence is all around us.
Hmm. And I think like you said, when you're looking, and I'm sure as you started writing the stories and seeing, because it's like when you slow down long enough, you can see God's hand throughout each person. One of the stories was about someone in more place. It was a young girl, and someone was donating money. Then there was a card, like a thank you card, and
Yeah, this is chapter 2 in the book. So you don't I didn't want people to have to read my previous books to understand Trust the Whisper, right? In my very first book that I wrote in 2016, it's called The 100-Story Home, and it tells the whole incidents and all of why I believe in whispers and how I had this experience with Denver Moore. And the last chapter is called Trust the Whisper, not knowing that I was going to write this book someday. But the first chapter talks about how I ended up quitting my job, and we were in this very unlikely time. It was 2008. We obviously didn't know there was going to be a huge recession, and we were trying to raise $10 million to build this apartment building, which looking back was impossible, right? Who can raise $10 million in a financial banking city when there's been an enormous, the world's worst recession in forever? But we didn't know that at the time. We just knew that we wanted to try to do this. And one day at work, I got an envelope and I opened it up. It was like a pink envelope with a Hallmark card, and I opened it up, and a few dollars fell out, like a five and three ones. And when I looked at the card, there was no name. I had no idea who it was from. It just had an inscription that somebody had written, "May God bless and multiply this small amount." And I thought, well, gosh, like I can't believe we're trying to raise $10 million and someone sent us basically $8 for a $10 million capital campaign. What an act of faith. Like, how kind. And it kind of made my day. And I went on and didn't think much about it. And 2 weeks later, I got another one, the same type of card, different, but I opened it up and a different $10 bill fell out. The same type of a inscription, may God bless and multiply this small amount. And Lauren, they kept coming just like every couple of weeks. And I started thinking of it as our mailbox angel. Like somebody
mhm,
was sending us their last cards and their dollars and their blessings. And I couldn't understand why. But it did become almost like a prophecy, because we started having people send. We had kids who had a lemonade stand and sent us $105. We had two college kids who rode their bikes
mhm,
across the United States and sent us $6,000. We had $10 checks. We had $1 million gift, and it all came together, and we did raise that money. All of that time, it took us 4 years to raise the money and build the building and open it. All of that time, that mailbox angel was very faithful, sending us the cards and letters. We had no idea. until one day there was a mistake. We received one of the envelopes, and in the upper hand corner, somebody had written the first initial and their last name. And we put two and two and together, and that was that somebody who we had housed in Moore Place, his name was Dale Haley. What he didn't know and what he couldn't tell us is that he had a mom who loved him very much in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she knew that her son was homeless. She was not sure what had happened to him, and she read about Moore Place in the paper that we were trying to raise this ridiculous amount of money. And she didn't know if it would help her some, but she thought it would help somebody some. So she started sending her cards and her letters and her blessings, hoping that someday it would help her son. And it did, because we ended up housing Dale Haley, and his mother, Frances Haley, was the person who, for over 4 years, sent us all those cards and blessings. And as a result of being housed at Moore Place, the two of them were reunited, and we found the answer to our story. And to me, Lauren, that was just such an undeniable God dot. Like, who would believe that small act of faith to send cards and blessings and $5 would someday reconnect this woman with her son who she had not seen in forever and didn't know what had happened to him. All of the chain of events, from us coming together to build a building, to her reading it about in the paper, to her son accepting housing and moving in and reaching back out to his mother and putting all those together. To me, it was just evidence of that divine weave that we sometimes find it difficult to believe in. But when you see that story, to me, it was just undeniable. And it, to me, it's not only why I wanted to write this book, Trust the Whisper, but why I wanted to write my first book, because the 100-Story Home, because there were so many stories like that of how More Place got built and people's motivations of how they came to that project and why it happened, that I
Mhm.
just wanted to put that evidence of the world that there's so much bad, right? There's so many bad
Yeah.
stories that sometimes these good stories can get lost. And so I love being able to be a storyteller for good and tell these stories and hopefully encourage and inspire other people to believe in their own God dots and their own God stories.
It's incredible. Like, I couldn't read that without crying because I'm like, it's so incredible that faith of the dollar bills and the $5, dropping out, the whatever she could give all that time, and then realizing she was giving to her own son and all the other sons and daughters that needed it.
Yeah, because it's so what we all think, right? Like, you might read about something or you hear about something at your church or your school, and it just seems so big. You think, "Well, what difference does it make? Like, how can my time matter? How can my dollars matter?" But what if you did? Because sometimes you never know. You will never know the end of the story if you don't try. If she hadn't tried, can you imagine how remarkable if she had missed that story? What
Mhm.
happened because she did listen and didn't listen to her fear voice. She didn't listen to the negative that said, "Oh,
Yeah.
your money won't matter. Why would you bother to do that?" But it did, and all those people sending all their dollars, the 105, the 5,000, the $10 gifts, the $1,000,000 gifts, it all mattered. It all came together to matter, and I think that's what we need to remember in our own lives, that a small action, a small kindness, we have no idea what the ripple effect might be.
Mhm. And you changing your career, I mean, like walking away from your career is like, okay, I feel like God's calling me to do this. I'm going to just step out in faith and see what happens. And then looking back at all the lives touched and story after story in your book, how people are connected and intertwined. And like the story about the store, is it the Green Chair Project?
The
Is that
Green Chair
correct?
Project,
Yes.
yes. So there's a woman who listened to her whisper in Raleigh, North Carolina. She had been volunteering at a women's prison ministry, and she was hearing a whisper that she was supposed to be doing something else, kind of like me. Her name's Jackie Craig, and we're fast friends because we had a very similar experience of wanting to do something different, but not quite knowing what it was. And in her case, she kept feeling like there was something more she was meant to be doing with the prison ministry, but maybe something to do with furniture. And she thought, well, what am I supposed to do? Decorate the prison cells? Like, I don't understand. And she said that she got so frustrated with this sense of restlessness that she was supposed to be doing something, that one day she was actually headed to her church and she stopped and she just said, "Okay, God, whatever this is, let's either get on with it or get it out of my head, because I can't take this anymore." And she said she got to church, she walked into church and a woman's coming down the hall, and she said, "Oh, Jackie, I have in my car a lamp and a toaster. Do you know anyone who might need it?" And that was Jackie's aha moment because she was like, "Yes, I do. There's actually a woman who's being released from prison. She's gonna go to an apartment. She has nothing, and she could absolutely use that lamp and the toaster." And that is what became the Green Chair Project. It is now the largest kind of ministry and furniture aid organization in the state of North Carolina. It's helped thousands of people, not just lamps and toasters, but full bedrooms and living rooms, and it allows people dignity and choice to restart their lives. So that was one chapter and one piece, but then it turns out someone hundreds of miles away in Charlotte, North Carolina, was having a similar whisper to do something. She couldn't quite figure out what it was. She found out about Jackie Craig and the Green Chair Project, and she and three other women have come together and start at a similar organization in Charlotte, North Carolina called Furnished for Good, and they are carrying on this mission hundreds of miles away, but in the same vein and with the same dignity and choice for people. And they were all strangers to each other. No one knew another, but they all had the same and similar collective whispers and are now coming together for good. I just think the way these stories unfold and the way
Mhm.
people find each other, and sometimes we're placed in each other's lives to help or to be inspiration. I find so much encouragement in that, that we're not hurtling alone on this
No.
planet, that when we're willing to listen and to say our dreams aloud, there's lots of people who are available to help us. I do think that they are most often, when we're looking, placed in our path for help.
Yes. I love that prayer that she said to God, like, "Okay, I need," it's not like this some holy prayer. "I need you to tell me or I'm moving
Yeah.
on." And God's
Yeah,
like, "Well,
let's
there."
get on with it,
Yeah,
or let's get it out of my head, because like I can't take this anymore. And
I can't
I
take it.
I do think, sometimes we do need to be that direct. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm ready. Like, let's get on with this.
Yeah, and it's not like an angel comes down, it's like, "Here's the toaster. Oh, there's my sign," you
Yeah.
know?
Lamp in the toaster. I know. Sometimes we just have to yeah, pay attention to the human signs in the world that are all around us. So get
All
a little
around.
still in all the busyness. Yeah.
I envision when I was reading about, the store, it's not nothing's wrong with Goodwill, but it's a beautiful store that you walk into, and there's
Lauren,
furniture.
it's incredible in
Mhm,
both the Green Chair Project in Raleigh and Furnished for Good in Charlotte. What they really have created is just such a dignified
mhm,
shopping experience. People are not expected to take anything because they have nothing. They are allowed the ability to choose what they might want for their homes and make them a haven and a safe place. And that dignity of choice really is the differentiator.
mm,
And I think we ended up, it's not in this book, but I did a podcast interview with Jackie, and she traces it back to her own family experience, that and she hadn't thought about it in years, and she didn't even realize it, but at one point her father lost his job, and she said, "My mom took us to the grocery store to the other side of town to use this thing called food stamps." And I
mm,
remember my mother being so ashamed, and it was clear we were on the other side of town, because if she was gonna use this thing called food stamps, that she was ashamed and she didn't want anyone to see her.
mm,
And that left such a deep impression on her, that I think that is what made Jackie create in the Green Chair Project this dignity of choice, that everyone should be treated with respect, and not meant to, not feel like they should be accepting charity, that they have choice in their lives and they have
mm,
agency. And I do think this idea of things that are imprinted on us way back are will always be part of our
yeah,
story, right? Jackie
yeah.
had no idea that experience in the food stamps with her family and the shame that she felt would decades later be part of the story that she created this truly amazing nonprofit.
There was another thing, like, reading that really stood out to me is when you felt like God was calling you to be a speaker and to speak, and you're like, "Oh, are you sure? Is this really the voice that I'm hearing?" Talk to us about that, please.
Yeah, so like most people, I have a huge fear of public speaking. I also would not want to raise money. And so if you had told me 17 years ago, well, hey, two of the things you're really going to be doing in later is be speaking to people and raising money, I would say, nope, absolutely not. That is not my call. That is not my whisper. Not doing either one of those things. And here I am years later. Yes, those are both part of my story. So when I was struggling with this idea, I'd been asked to talk at a very big event, almost 1,000 people, about raising the money for More Place. And I mean, I believed it was a good story. I just didn't believe I was the person to stand up and
And
and say
deliver
it
it.
because
Yeah.
I yes, because I still even today, I still sweat when I have to public speak, even though I've gotten used to doing it. So I was really wrestling with this. And the person he was trying to convince me was the director of the nonprofit at the time, and he really wanted me to do this. It was our annual fundraiser, and he handed me this book. It was called Predictable Miracles by Bruce Wilkinson. I don't know if anyone's read that, but it was this idea that sometimes people are put in our past, and you can be miracles are happening around us. So I'd taken this book, and I didn't know why he thought this would be something that I might help me say yes, but I'd already said no. I said, book another speaker because it's not going to be me. And I was on an airplane going from North Carolina to California, and I sat down on the plane, and I had this book, and I looked to my left, and there was an older woman sitting next to me. She was knitting, and I heard a very clear sense, thought that was not my thought. Ask her what she does. And I thought, why would I do that? She's an older woman who knits. Like, I really don't like talking to people on planes because you get into very long conversations. And from North Carolina to California is a very long conversation. So I was not going to do it. But throughout that flight, I just kept hearing, ask her what she does. So finally, right before we were landing, I just couldn't ignore it. It was so insistent. Kind of turned to my seatmate and tried to make conversation. And I just said, "Oh, where are you going in California?" And she was kind of evasive. She says, "Well, I don't really know." And I thought, "Well, who gets on a plane to California and doesn't know where where they're going?" And she says, "I'm being picked up at the airport and I'm taken somewhere. I'm a speaker." And I was like, "Oh gosh, okay, she's a speaker. Of all the planes taking off today and landing, why would the woman next to be a speaker?" And anyway, we got into this conversation. I said, "Well, it's funny that you said that. Did you ever think that you would be a speaker?" And she was, "Oh, heavens no. Like I would never think that I was going to be a speaker." I said, "Well, that's funny because right now someone's trying to get me to be a speaker and I don't know how to get comfortable with it." And she cut me off. She goes, "Don't ever get comfortable with it because if you do, it becomes about you and not about God. You're obviously being asked to give a message and just get comfortable with, giving that message." And she gave me all this advice. And Lauren, it truly just flipped my whole perspective. Like, one, why was this woman sitting next to me? Why was she
Hmm.
giving me the message that I needed to hear at a time I needed to hear it? And how could it be possible, right? And so I think that whole experience for me, I did end up getting off the plane. I did end up calling and I did end up giving that speech for 1,000 people. And I've given many since then. But it started with just listening to that whisper, ask her what she does, and somehow the person that I needed to give me confidence to get over my fear voice and try something like this, somehow was sitting next to me on a plane to California that I can't ever explain,
Hmm.
but it happened. So
Yeah. I love, yeah, when I was reading that, I was like, God, you're so good, using the sweet lady knitting on the plane, and you're probably, like, palms are sweaty, like, "Really, do I have to talk to this person? Really, do I have to say this?"
oh my gosh, and I do a lot of, speaking either for
Mhm.
homeless service organizations or I talk at writers' conferences or women's groups or churches. I mean, I still sweat. I still have a hard time with it, but I still do what she told me that day. She says, I always, before I speak, I go into the bathroom and I say a small prayer to myself. And I mean, I still use that today. I will kind of remove myself before I have to speak and I will just say a small prayer and say, "Hey, God, I will show up if you will show off." And I
Mhm.
just ask that I somehow find the words to be encouraging that day to whoever it is that I'm talking to.
Yeah, it reminds you it's not all about you, it's about him and him using you.
Yeah, and then I've been given an amazing story and a message, and I really want to encourage others to listen to their own story. And who knows? I do think we're capable of far more than we imagine. And none of this was planned in my life. I certainly didn't plan any of this, but I am now willing to show up and encourage others in whatever their story might be.
I'm telling you, I'm a mom of boys and I work full time and doing the podcast. I don't have a whole lot of free time to read, but I did not want to put your book down. It's easy to read, it flows. It's so encouraging and it really ministered in my heart. I just kept wanting to read to the next chapter, the next chapter. My husband's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm reading, leave me alone." So, anybody that wants to hear inspiring stories and being encouraged, I just highly recommend your book. I will put all your information in the show notes about your other books as well. I did not realize. So this book has a children's book to go with it as well?
It does. It's called Grace Heard a Whisper. And because I just think you're never too old, you're never too young to start
Yes.
listening, a little more emphasis on your soul talk rather than what those around you are saying. And so, yeah, it's a book about a little girl named Grace who hears a whisper and she's asking the people around her, like, did you hear a whisper? Did not. And then she's encouraged by her neighbor, Mrs. Cook, who's like, oh, yes, Grace, I hear whispers. And that's your soul talking to you. It's a little piece of God that came with you. And it encourages you to help you find what you're meant to do in the world. So it's that story, and I would like to think I published them together so that moms could read Trust the Whisper, or grandparents, any adults, and read the kids read that book, and then you can foster these conversations of calling and purpose in life. So that was the point of publishing them together. So
I love it. Okay, I'm gonna read your book again and then have my boys read the children's
well,
version,
I'm gonna send you a Grace book. Yes.
and we're gonna do it all together. Thank you so much, Kathy. Is there anything else you would like to share? I had all my topics that I wanted to learn from you, but is there anything else that maybe I missed or that's on your heart to share?
Oh, well, I just think if anyone's listening and maybe you think, oh, starting a nonprofit's big or building a building is big. I don't think it always starts that way. I think whispers are a muscle that we need to exercise, and just listening to those little voices, whether it's to be kind to one person or to check on your neighbor. And when you realize how some of those small kindnesses or acts have ripple effects, it starts to strengthen our belief when we do get a bigger call. And it could be as big as a building, but maybe it's just to mentor one child or do one small thing that's part of what you're meant to do in this world. So I don't want anyone to think, oh, this book is about doing giant things and I don't want to
Mhm.
read it because I'm scared of doing giant things. I do just think it's about finding your authentic call, what you're meant to do in this world. And I hope people read the book and are encouraged by that.
That's how I felt, Kathy. I didn't feel overwhelmed at all. I felt very encouraged because if I felt overwhelmed, I probably wouldn't have kept reading. It's so encouraging, and you wanna continue to read the next story and the next story because you wanna see what happens, and you wanna follow those God dots because it's just very encouraging and inspiring.
Oh, thanks, Lauren, and I'm glad. I mean, when you write a book, you always think, "Where is this gonna end up? Who's gonna be reading it?" So it's always fun to talk to someone who read the book, and it did encourage them, so thank you.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the show today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Lauren, it's wonderful to meet you through this.
Kathy's book, Trust the Whisper, reminds us to stop and listen because God's always talking to us. He's always guiding us and directing us if we stop long enough to listen. And those little nudges, whispers, thoughts, whatever you want to call it, that thing that keeps pulling at your heartstrings. The other night I was thinking, how do you explain this? Maybe this sounds silly, but like when you're craving ice cream and that craving just won't go away, that's sometimes what God does. He just keeps putting that thought on your mind. And like Kathy said, it's nothing that you would have ever thought, like quit my job and go raise all this money to help build a shelter. Or maybe it's something small. And then God just is waiting to see, are you going to trust him with a small thing? Then maybe he'll give you bigger and bigger and bigger. I encourage you to pray. Always pray about those thoughts. It's like, God, is this of you? Is this your doing? And if those thoughts don't go away, then act upon it and see what happens, see what doors open. You will just be surprised and blown away about the things that happen in your life and the lives of those around you. I wanted to take a moment and read a little bit of what Kathy writes here. When you experience something that cannot be explained by coincidence or happenstance, that is your own God dot story. When you begin to see how your small miracles interweave with others, that is connecting the God dots. Each God dot, each tiny story is part of the bigger story, the one we all here to understand. What is this life about? What is my purpose? Is there a God? How can I be certain? For me, trusting the whispers in my life signaled the beginning of answering all of these questions. I encourage you, if you are curious, what is a God dot? What is a whisper? How do I know what that feels or looks like? This is a fantastic story, and it's easy to read, it's easy to understand, and it's very encouraging. So I'll put in the show notes how to reach out to Kathy and how to get her information about her books. Thank you so much for listening to the Redeem podcast. I'd like to just stop and pray over you. Father, I thank you, Jesus, for Kathy and for the gifts and the talents you've given her and the things that you've done in her life and her boldness to say yes and to take a leap of faith and all the doors that you've opened. Father, for the person listening that's not sure about this whole God whisper and God dots, and they're not quite sure how to hear your voice, or they're not even sure if you talk to them. God, would you show up in a big, mighty way? Would you tap them on the shoulder and say, yes, that is me. I've got some cool things I want to do in your life, but you've got to have faith and trust me. Will you trust me? I thank you for the opportunities that you give us. And I ask you, Jesus, that you would open doors in people's lives, that the ones that are praying over hard stuff, the ones that are maybe not sure if you really are God at all, that you would show them in only the way that you can do. I thank you for lives being transformed. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for being on the Redeemed podcast. Thank you for the reviews. Kiana, thank you for leaving some reviews on my Facebook page and on the Apple podcast. If you would like to hear more, please share these episodes with your friends. You can find me on YouTube and Spotify and Apple. And yes, I'm on social media. I love to hang out on Instagram. And I'm also on Facebook, Lauren Burns Redeemed. Until next time, I hope you have a fantastic day.